Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to The Sanctuary. I'm your host, Professor C, and we're going to do some more A&P today. Specifically, we're going to continue through neurology, and we're going to talk about the difference between a sensory and a motor pathway, also known as afferent pathways versus efferent pathways. So, let's check it out. Well, now that we know a little bit more about the neurons and receptors, let's expand our understanding of neural activity by looking at the circuitry, both the input, the throughput, and the output of the nervous system. We're going to start off very simple, and if you learn this, you can understand all the complexities that come after it, because that's all the nervous system will do is add complexity to this system. So I have a little machine here. I'm putting some sort of information into it. That's called input. Some sort of processor or control center will try to understand that information, and then another component of the system will spit out some sort of outflow or output some sort of effect. And this is, at the heart of it, the nervous system, as simply as you can get it. Again, we have some kind of input, 1 star. We have a processor that's doubling the information, and the output is 2 stars. And if that seems too simple for you, well, you're in the right place, because neurology can be simple. All we're going to do is take this concept and then add more layers of complexity to it over the next few talks. So let's check out some more of the details and put some anatomical terms to these words. So let's start with the input. And if you notice here at the top of the image on the left, anything in blue is going to be representative of input. And this is a convention that's followed in a lot of textbooks, where sensory pathways or input is colored blue. Now you could also refer to this as afferent pathways. Afferent referring toward, meaning you're headed toward, and I'll go ahead and put 2 here just so we see the flow. We're heading toward the central nervous system. So information will be gathered by receptors, and if we remember from our other talks, we find the receptors at the dendritic end of these neurons. So I'll just sketch out a few here to remind us where these receptors are. It doesn't matter we're in the eyeball, it's just showing that kind of as a reference. And we're going to take information that we've gathered from the environment, turn it into electrical signals known as action potentials, and send those down along axons of these sensory neurons, these input neurons. And of course, where are we taking it? Well, we're taking it here to the central nervous system. So in red, I'll box this brain, but it could also be the spinal cord down here. This is the central nervous system. So if a receptor is picking up information and that is being transmitted toward the central nervous system, this is known as an afferent or a sensory pathway. The second part of this has to do with the central nervous system, either the brain, if you want to talk about, say, deep thought, or talk about the spinal cord when you're thinking of some sort of reflex type of action. So the analysis part will take place usually completely within the central nervous system. More formally, it's known as integration or association, or some other things we'll see down the road. And sometimes this green neuron that's stuffed in the central nervous system will be called an interneuron, but it doesn't have to be present at all. You could go straight from blue to red, as we'll see later, but for now we're going to keep it as simple as we can. So if we want to interpret the information that's come to us, analyze it, store it, do some decision making about the information that's come in through the sensory pathways, this is where it would happen, either in the brain or the spinal cord during integration. So we're going to move action potentials here through the CNS, and that's the important part about integration, is it's moving through either the brain or the spinal cord. Now, the outflow, the output, is everything in red at the bottom left of the slide down here. This is referred to as the motor pathway. So motor doesn't mean motion all the time. Motor means output in the nervous system. Another term for that is efferent, with the stress on the E. Now again, you can pronounce it efferent, but I'm going to say efferent so we hear the difference between afferent, the input, and efferent, the output. So output flow, motor flow, is an efferent. It is heading toward some sort of effector. And in this class, and pretty much all classes, the effectors will either be some kind of muscle, as you see in the image, or some kind of gland, like say a sweat gland or something like that. So again, we're going to carry signals here away from the CNS, and I'll go ahead and write it here, away from the brain or the spinal cord, depending on where the integration occurred. And again, the point is to make some sort of specific effectation, some effect, some specific response, not just some random response, but some specific response that's been tailored based on the input and the analysis of that input. And there you have the total pathway, in, through, and out. Now, we can get a little fancier if we look at an actual cross-section of a spinal cord here. And that's exactly what you're seeing here, is a cross-section. Now, you see some white matter out here, and it is colored white, and you see some gray matter here, and it is colored a darker, kind of a gray color. Not true gray, but you get the point. And if you remember the previous talks, the white matter is going to be myelinated fibers, and the gray matter is going to be unmyelinated fibers. So, without getting into the specifics yet, we can talk about a little of these structures. Back here, this is referred to as the dorsal horn. I'll put DH so we see it. And this is referred to as the lateral horn. And this is referred to as the ventral horn of the spinal cord. And we'll hear a lot about this as we continue through our journey. But I want to stop here and notice on the right side, we see our blue line, our green line, and our red line. So let's put some terms here to this, right? So you can start this pathway up here with some sort of stimulation, right? What is it? It doesn't matter. We're just going to call it generic stimulation, some sort of stimulus. And of course, this is going to trigger an environmental change. And if it is sufficient enough, we're going to have some receptor wake up and detect that stimulus, right? So there's the receptor level, the dendritic end of the neuron. Again, turn that information into electrical impulses, send it down the axon of that sensory neuron, and that's exactly what this next thing would be. This is a sensory pathway, or an afferent. I'm just going to go ahead and put sensory here. Neuron. I'll put a big A to remind us this is headed toward the spinal cord, so it is headed afferently toward the central nervous system. And notice how it enters here in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Now, once we're totally embedded within the spinal cord, totally within the central nervous system, we're going to have that green cord show up. And we know this is for analysis or interpretation. So this is integration, and I'm just going to put interneuron here, which is how we usually see it spelled in textbooks. So the integration is happening here very reflexively. There's not a lot of deep thought going on in the spinal cord. We have input, then direct output, but a little bit of integration happening here in the interneuron. Okay, now from the ventral end, or the belly side of the spinal cord, we leave the central nervous system. So if we're headed away now from the central nervous system, this must be some kind of a motor pathway. So right here would be a motor neuron. Remember, motor doesn't have to mean motion, it means outflow. So there's a motor neuron, and we can do the same thing. We can call this an efferent pathway because it's headed away from the spinal cord here, from the central nervous system, to an effector. And that's what would be out here at the end of the level, would be the effector level. Again, some sort of muscle or gland that's going to allow us to do the effect or the effectation of the stimulus. And then, of course, we're going to get some sort of result. I don't know what you would call it, but I'm just going to call it result. And that is the total pathway of input, throughput, and output, using the spinal cord as an example of this. Now, all we're going to do in the future is take this image and add complexity, add layers to it as we move through and talk about different parts of the nervous system and how they work. All right, hope you enjoyed that talk on afferents and efferents. Thanks for watching it to the end if you did. Check out some other videos if you want to learn more about A&P, and I will see you for the next one. Bye-bye.